Recording in progress.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. We're gonna call call to order the Retail Committee Special Meeting for today, Wednesday, May 15th, 2024. We have, just to let everybody know, we've added Councilmember Burt to our team. So, Mr. Clerk, will you please call roll?
Chair Koo,
Here?
Councilmember Burt,
Here.
Councilmember Lippincott-Haynes.
Here.
For the record, 3 present. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And our next item is public comments. Do we have any public comments on items not on the agenda?
Yes, we do have one request to speak.
And warmed up.
Warmed up, comfortable.
There we go. Good morning, everybody. My name is Roxy Rapp, retired retailer and going to be retired developer here soon. My son's taking over all development. I want to talk this morning about all of Palo Alto, not just downtown Palo Alto, but I'm talking about California Avenue, all over. And the key for landlords, and including the landlords that are sitting behind me, are the realtors. And the realtors are from San Francisco all the way down to San Jose, and sometimes they're out of state that bring customers here. But usually they go through a realtor, either in San Francisco, a big realtor company, or San Jose. And the problem is the bloom is kind of off Palo Alto. That if you're looking to expand your business and you have a great concept, Palo Alto is always the place to go. And what has happened is that the word is out now that Palo Alto is so tough to get your permit to move in. And it has not to do with building. I'm talking about planning. That planning is part of building, but it's the planning department is the stumbling block for realtors that want to come in. But you got to realize realtors is their commission. That's how they make their money, that they bring to the landlord the tenants. And if they know that they're not going to get the deal in Palo Alto because it's so tough, they rather go to Menlo Park, they rather go to Burlingame, San Carlos, Redwood City, Mountain View, Sunnyvale, because it's easier. It's easier to get through. And so they're not coming to us with a lot of with new concepts of retail, because the word is out is how tough it shouldn't take a year, but it takes over a year sometimes, because I think planning is partly understaffed maybe. And even like an economic development person, I think you got a new person that's in charge. That person should be able to take that person that wants to come in and open up a store and get them through the process quickly. For it doesn't take a year, or it doesn't take 8 months. I think if you talk to the landlords that are sitting right behind me, they could just tell you story after story of other cities. It's just so much easier to get through the process. So I don't know if it's our codes or what it is that holds them up, but it seems like it's just so slow to get the process. And so I just want to bring that to your attention.
Your time is up.
Thank you.
Thank you, Roxy.
And Chair, that concludes public comments for this item.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. And with that, we'll go to our next item, which is action item number 1. Receive and accept report regarding near and medium-term initiatives that focus on enhancing retail and hotel uses. Mr. Gargalato?
Thank you, Chair Koo. Members of the Retail Committee, Steve Guagliardo, Assistant to the City Manager, still responsible for coordinating the city's economic development efforts. Here, yeah. I'm glad Roxy came to the table instead of talking behind my back for that comment. Here today to discuss near and medium-term initiatives to enhance retail and hotel uses, really following up from the adoption of the comprehensive economic development strategy, and touch on some of the things actually mentioned in public comment, and also advance the conversation regarding economic development. You advance to the next slide, please. So the comprehensive economic development strategy was approved by council unanimously on August 14th, 2023. It consisted of 3 guiding principles with 10 recommendations broken out into 28 discrete actions. As part of the unanimous approval of that economic development strategy, council directed staff to return with near and medium-term initiatives to enhance retail and hotel uses. Many of those initiatives were incorporated into our work plan for the City Council's 2024 priority of economic development and transition. So when that was approved back in March of this year, a lot of those initiatives were addressed through specific objectives within that work plan. Today's report out to the Retail Committee is going to focus on the strategies, the economic development strategies, connections to current city work, breaking out how each of those 28 actions are connected to the work of the organization. We're also going to highlight some work that is underway through the Planning and Transportation Commission and their focus on retail zoning, touching on some of the things that Roxy, our public speaker, specifically mentioned about how to streamline the code, how to make things easier, and finally looking to enhance our hotel support in town. So Vin, if you don't mind advancing to the next slide. This slide shows the guiding principles from the Street Sense strategy, 1, 2, and 3, and shows how each of the individual actions within those guiding principles is being addressed. I want to call out that there is overlap and interconnection here, and so we grouped them as best we could, but there's overlap that I'll talk about as we get through. So for guiding principle number 1, focused on reinforcing each district's distinct scale and offerings. 7 of those are being addressed through the Economic Development and Transition Work Plan. 1 of those objectives is being addressed through other city work, and 1 is not currently actively being worked on. The one that's currently not actively being worked on there is the idea of providing some money for commerce cards that would be like a discount card type thing. That's not currently being resourced as a function. Guiding principle number 2 is on improving accessibility by embracing walking and biking solutions to, from, and within all of the city's commercial districts. Although none of these are explicitly in the Economic Development and Transition Work Plan, they are being addressed through other city work. Just a few weeks ago, council heard discussion on the Bike and Pedestrian Transportation Plan. Many of the actions included in guiding principle number 2 are being addressed through that, as well as our safe systems approach being worked on through the Office of Transportation. The other things included in there include activating spaces through murals and art, and our public art team is actively working on that through things like murals, through things like painting utility boxes that'll be discussed with council as they go forward as well. The 3 that are not actively being worked on are conversations about micromobility. Those were actions from Street Sense to look at, e-bikes and e-scooters and work that our Office of Transportation had previously done. Ultimately, those projects did not bear fruit, and we avoided some of the consequences that other cities saw in terms of scooters littering everywhere and everything else. Just wanted to call out those pieces. And finally, guiding principle number 3, which is a significant topic of conversation today, which is adopting policies that reflect changing market conditions and looking at the regulatory burden for businesses, looking at restrictions that create hurdles to tenancy, looking at retail and retail-like uses in places where they are market supported. Now, I categorize most of these as being addressed through other city work because it's the topic of conversation that's been happening at Planning and Transportation Commission, but it is also addressed through an objective on the Economic Development and Transition Work Plan, which was to look at the citywide retail zoning strategy. So this is one where there's a lot of overlap between those 2 categories. Really wanted to dive deep into this and the conversation that's been happening at Planning and Transportation Commission. And so if we go to the next slide, wanted to just talk briefly with the Retail Committee about the work that PTC has undergone. PTC formed a retail ad hoc that had 4 general categories of recommendations for overhauling our zoning requirements related to retail. 1 was to simplify rules, 2 was to reduce uncertainty, 3 was to relax restrictions, and 4 was them looking beyond simple zoning changes. They've been working with Michael Baker International, who prepared a retail revitalization study for the city of Palo Alto that created 7 main groups of strategies. Those are all up there on the slide, and they really echo what we just heard in public comment. It's looking at a comprehensive zoning cleanup of our mature and complex code. Codes develop over decades and longer. They get added to, and we're probably past due for an overall holistic examination of it to understand what we have in there. That will look at our options where things overlap, where we have footnotes, where we have carve-outs, where we have exceptions, and try to really streamline things so we have a clear understanding that we can portray to realtors and other interested parties about what uses can be cited where in a clear and comprehensive way to understand. They also want to create streamlined and predictable approval processes. Michael Baker did give the city credit for the processes we do have in place now. Nonetheless, there remains constant room for improvement for making it clear what our process is and how people can navigate those. They recommended looking at limiting the retail preservation ordinance. This is mainly looking at the geography of the retail preservation ordinance and making sure it's affecting the impacts that we want to be implemented. Looking at allowing non-retail uses on ground floor in certain cases with limitations. Looking at repealing office conversion and construction limitations. Relaxing rules on formula retail, and easing parking regulations. Now, the PTC discussed these last Wednesday, and the ad hoc did voice their perspective that Michael Baker's study has its recommendations, but the ad hoc and overall the PTC don't necessarily agree with each and every recommendation in the Michael Baker study. So we are working on agendizing this for council. As that goes to council, there will be a letter from the PTC ad hoc that accompanies it that clarifies their perspective and standpoint on which of these they think the city should pursue. One thing that came up at PTC was the discussion of splitting the conversation a little bit and splitting it by time and by phase. So looking at conducting a comprehensive zoning cleanup is not the work of a moment. That's a long-term, significant undertaking with staff and consultants to make sure that we catch everything, that everything's streamlined, that it's all brought together in one cohesive place. But there may be some low-hanging fruit that can be executed and implemented more quickly, such as relaxing formula retail rules on California Avenue. And so as that comes forward to council for discussion, PTC will be voicing their perspective on that as well. The second piece I wanted to talk about today is the work that we have underway to enhance hotel support. The Chamber of Commerce has a number of hotels as members, and they have a hotel working group in their constituency. They've begun the process of exploring partnership with the San Mateo County Convention and Visitors Bureau. That's the organization known as the San Francisco Peninsula to focus on destination marketing efforts. The city will work to ensure that all hoteliers, not just those in the Chamber of Commerce, are included in the conversation as it continues and make sure that we understand the full range of options that may be available. We really want to make sure that if this partnership is pursued, that it makes sense for our hotel stakeholders and that it's doing what we need them to do. The other thing that we're working to do is onboard consultant resources specifically focused on the hotel sector. The hotel sector is different than other sectors, and the hotels within Palo Alto are different than hotels in many neighboring jurisdictions. Their reliance on business stays, the opportunity to grow weekend stays, those are all slightly different than our neighboring cities. And so we want to make sure we have resources in place to do things like stakeholder interviews and focus groups, researching cities with similar hotel stay profiles, and really developing actionable strategies that the city can implement on growing those hotel stays. That brings us to just the next steps. So the city council is going to review the work of PTC later this year to talk about retail zoning and understand what's in the Michael Baker report, understand what PTC's ad hoc on retail recommends pursuing, and understand what options the city council wants to pursue in terms of that retail zoning reform. Additionally, economic development staff will continue to meet with stakeholders. We do this through various channels. We have a monthly Business Connect newsletter that goes out. We have monthly meetings with members of each business district. We're starting the downtown one tomorrow with a Zoom meeting. CalAv continues, and we're working on Midtown, getting that resurrected and regoing with those merchants. We have regular conversations with the Chamber of Commerce as our partner in economic development, and we have individual conversations with business and stakeholders. So with that, we have a recommended motion, which is that the Retail Committee recommend the City Council accept the report on near medium-term initiatives that focus on enhancing retail and hotel uses. With that, I'm ready for any clarifying questions council may have and further discussion.
Okay, the process is we're going to come back to council for clarifying questions, then go out for public comments, and then return to council for final comments. Any questions? Councilmember Byrd.
Thanks. On the near-term initiatives, I wasn't able to get any clear understanding on what really are these next near-term initiatives and what is our schedule for completing each of them. Do we have such a document?
We've discussed this previously at retail committee, and so happy to re-engage in that conversation on what those types of things that we're looking at doing are. If there's a specific district you're focused on, happy to go district by district. If there's just kind of larger questions, happy to.
Well, so I'm interested in both Cal Ave and downtown in particular, but certainly Midtown as well. But other than kind of recapping, my question is, do we have a document that lays out, here are the near-term actions, and here are the scheduled completion dates, and any barriers that we may have, and which department has the lead on each of them? Is there a plan that's a written plan to that effect that would be a rolling plan?
So there is a rolling plan. We don't yet have it produced in full written form, but we have conversations on a weekly basis with those stakeholder departments about what's happening in each district and working to identify and troubleshoot what those barriers are and how best to overcome them.
So I'm concerned that if there's not a written plan, it's hard to really have a clear strategy that stays on schedule, that is transparent to everyone, not only within the staff, but to those retail communities. I'm surprised we don't have a written plan. That would be one of the things that I definitely want to have as part of the outcome, and a recommendation, if it need be, a recommendation to council to direct that. But I think it would just be a normal course of action that there'd be such a plan after all these months. It's been 6 months since the council gave that direction on wanting to really proceed on those near-term initiatives. I know some things have been done, and that would be part of that list, is here's what was done and when, and which department was the lead on it, or in the coordinating ones. So that would be one area. Second, a note on the Visitors Bureau and the role of the city working with the chamber on that to promote hotels. I'm really glad to hear that. I was involved when we initially created that, and the city engaged with the what was in the San Mateo County Visitors Bureau. After 2 years, they came back and said, you're the only government agency that we actually have to account to. Everywhere else, it's kind of private nonprofits, and your demands as a government agency for accountability are just make it not worth it to us. So what we did was we spun it off, and by then the hotel said, well, we think it's great and we'll take it on. The funding that we did for that was initially out of a fraction of the additional hotel tax revenue we got when we did our first TOT increase from 12 to 14%. We said, well, we ought to have an obligation to take a fraction of that additional revenue and invest it in the very hotels and marketing program that we'd never had. Now, I thought that was really reasonable. So my point being, as this is being revisited, I would support the city providing a fraction of the funding for this as a partner with the hotels, because the more hotel occupancy we have and the higher average daily rates, because that occupancy goes up, the more revenue there is to the city, which is tremendous revenue. That's one of the few taxes we get 100% of. So I'd certainly support that. And then I did want to address one thing that when Roxy Rapp spoke about how, as we're trying to promote revitalization in retail, one of the biggest barriers we have as a city is our cumbersome permitting and inspections and everything related to a retail business getting started. And I've heard this for years, and increasingly recently, as we've been saying, well, we want more retail. And I hear time and again, you don't get it. A lot of folks are not coming here because of our barriers. And when I opened a business, it was not retail, but in San Carlos, a third location, they had put in an economic development manager, and that role was largely as an ombudsman that would go and bring together the departments. Somebody wants to come in and make it clear, and so that the folks aren't going to 5 different doors. Now we do have a development center that in theory helps on that. But then also, if there were barriers placed, to not ignore the rules, but to figure out how to streamline resolution to problems. And I don't see a recognition of that problem nor a plan to address it as being part of our near or medium term economic development strategy. Is there? Yeah, go ahead, Steve, if there's.
Sure. So I just want to reply briefly to that, as well as to your points about accountability and transparency on timelines for these overall projects. And so by district, we did include timelines in our presentation last month. And so we do have that laid out. It's just not all in one comprehensive document. So I just wanted to clarify that just a little bit. But
they a series of documents or what?
Yeah, in the PowerPoint presentations from last month's retail committee, we have the near and medium term projects for Cal Ave laid out on the Cal Ave discussion, and the work happening on University Ave laid out as well. But I also want to return to your point about, helping people navigate the process, serving as an ombudsperson, and thinking creatively about how we can overcome some of those things. And that's not explicitly called out, but that is something that's actively happening. I spoke with brokers last week, interested in potential tenant on University Avenue and helping them understand what our current parklet rules are and just reducing their uncertainty about what might happen there. I've worked with a business that's currently located on Cal Ave to help them troubleshoot the conditional use permitting process and make sure that they were able to site appropriately and get where they need to go. So that is work that's actively underway and engaged on. It's not called out. That's almost work that's kind of below the waterline is how I would refer to it. But I do want to be clear that that work is happening on an active basis.
If I could also add to that, that it is important to acknowledge the connection between that process and the codes that staff are administering. And so the issues that, as Steve pointed out, really were highlighted in the Michael Baker work that PTC is now reviewing in order to simplify the codes is really an integral part of that really simplification that we're trying to provide for applicants.
Right. And so that part of it that has to do with what are permitted uses and where and getting that clear, that's very important. But I don't think that's it's an important component and a significant one, not a small one. But I'm not sure that it's the majority of the issue. And I'm glad to hear that we're kind of on case-by-case basis trying to address this. But I am really interested in us first hearing that we still have big problems. If it just doesn't, we can sit there and say, no, we've got that covered. And I can't tell you how many years I've heard that from and sincerely by our staff saying, no, we're streamlining it and we are working on it and we can show you how we've improved it. And then we hear the same comments that continue to occur. And so I think us recognizing that we have a significant problem there and putting it in writing in our plan is important. And within that, what I'd be really interested in seeing is, okay, what's a side-by-side comparison? A number of case studies that we can find from soliciting them from experiences of either prospective users or users, and comparing it to other cities and say, well, how would a similar process occur in Redwood City or Mountain View or who knows where? And And somehow we need to get out of us hearing ourselves and instead really hear the problems of the realtors and the retailers who are trying to come and match those up to whatever improvements we can make.
The other work that I would reference for the committee is follow-up to a building services audit that was completed last year and that has been ongoing work reported out through our Policy and Services Committee. So that, from a development services, and certainly if Director Late were here, would certainly hit on many of the issues you just described.
And I know and this kind of goes to our good intentions to address these things, but I still think that there's a disconnect between essentially our customers and their experiences and perceptions and our self-perception of the improvements we're making. They just don't seem to be aligned. And until we get kind of those side by side, I think we're doing what we think is needed, and it doesn't seem to align with what they think is needed.
Yeah, hear you loud and clear on the need for that customer service and customer experience troubleshooting. I will say I have very open lines of communication with our business stakeholders and fully expect to continue those open lines of communication to help identify what those areas may be and figure out how to best troubleshoot them. I also appreciate your point about incorporating that above the waterline to make sure we're naming it as something that we're accountable to and transparent on to the community that we're working on. That helps with, I think, the reputational issue you've identified of this has been going on for years. And so even as we start to change it, it's not the work of a moment to convince a broker who's tried to be here before and cite someone and they had a heck of a time with it, that we are making those strides. So hear your feedback on that. To the city manager's point, how do we tie that work that's already underway with that real life experience that our customers are experiencing and making sure we're resolving that on a go forward basis.
And we don't have it listed as part of our retail guiding principles. There's nothing I see that really references that or the strategies or anything. We don't list it as one of the most significant action areas that we need to address if we're going to solve this problem.
Yes, you are correct. It's not named in the Street Sense report. It, again, I think was kind of below the waterline type work, but hear you loud and clear about the need to be transparent and accountable on that.
Okay, so I'm going to be interested in our referral to council that we would include this as a near and medium term strategy that we need to pursue. Lastly, just on
Heck, I'm sorry, include what?
a focus on I'll call it permit streamlining. I'm not sure if that's the best way to describe it, but Steve, is there a better term to use?
I think the permit streamlining is good. I think, customer experience is another frame to apply to it.
I
Okay,
think that was one of also PTC's recommendations, right? Create
Yes.
streamlined and predictable approval process, conduct a comprehensive, well, that's a lot more long-term.
Right. Well, and again, I think there's phases and sequencing to this work where what are we going to be doing in the immediate with things like customer service training and other things happening at the development center, and what are we going to be doing longer term as we look at these processes, as we look at the underlying codes themselves and try to make those clearer as well, so it's easier for folks to navigate.
yeah, and really, I'm going to be really interested in stakeholder engagement that would align their perceptions with our perceptions and then comparison to other jurisdictions so that we can really step out of, no, look at all the stuff we're doing. This is kind of how we tend to think. We've done this and this and this. And we assume that that what we think we're doing is solving the problem. And I want to make sure that in the eyes and understandings of those stakeholders, they're in agreement, or if they're not in agreement, where they're not in agreement.
I hear you, and I think an important part of that peer city research is also understanding how their economic development functions are resourced. and understanding, as we want to scale and possibly step more into that space, what resources may need to be brought to bear there.
Yeah, that may be, and that would be one of the interesting things, but from what I've heard over the years repeatedly, decades, I'll say, not years, is that yes, they love it when we have economic development support, and that's a positive thing, but it's really in our permitting and inspections and things. I mean, I go back, there was Kali on CalAb, bent my ear for a couple years on, took them 2 years to get an awning comparable to their neighbor's awning, and it was just incredible. And that shouldn't need economic development interceding and additional staffing to solve problems like that. So the last area was a mention on the bicycle and pedestrian access, and one of the things that has been a strength of our retail communities historically and remains so is that we are a human scale and pedestrian oriented set of downtowns. And that's a real asset. People come here and they say, it's not skyscrapers. It feels like a European city or an East Coast city. It's walkable, it's rideable. That's a real identity of Palo Alto and an asset. And we do have the bike and ped master plan going forward. But my concern is that I think that the focus on the retail areas should be feeding into that plan rather than awaiting for that plan to determine what should be done in these areas. It's kind of a chicken and egg issue, but my inclination is no, we should be through this committee and through all these efforts really informing that plan as much as being informed.
Yes, and I am pleased to report that I am working with the Office of Transportation with my colleague Ruth on the development of that plan. So our input there is funneling what we hear at retail, what we hear from stakeholders, and what is in the Street Sense report to try and
and
get that
and
feedback.
To not have to wait until that plan comes out and begins implementation for us to be able to implement what we think is needed in these retail areas along it. That's one of the other concerns is, we have a new bike and ped master plan. Well, we actually have a very good existing one. And I haven't reread the sections that pertain to our retail areas to see how well they might inform what we're talking about here. But either way, from a timing standpoint, I want to make sure that we're not saying we'll get to those topics once they come out with the plan, which is, a couple years behind schedule already. And I have faith that it's going to be a good plan, but I don't want to sequentially await for it before we can really move forward in those areas here. Okay, thanks.
Councilmember Liscar Haynes, may I be informal in this?
Yes,
We just approved it, right, Julie?
please call me Julie. Council just decided that we could use first names. Officially, we would just say that first names are allowed at the committee level. Hope no one is offended by that. We're just intending to make things a little bit more congenial, I think. So thank you, Steve, for now I don't have to worry about saying your last name.
Yeah.
Steve G.
Steve G. Thank you, Mr. Guagliardo. Right when I figured it out, now we're going to first names. Thank you for this presentation. I agree with so much of what Pat has shared, and I'm going to try to offer a different shade of it to underscore, I think, the seriousness of the situation, but to maybe offer a slightly, another way of thinking about it. There's no doubt that there is such urgency for us to figure out how to bring back the roaring economic engine of the great city of Palo Alto. We have been hit from numerous sides by a lot of things, mostly out of our control. And here we are with the sense that the bloom is off the rose, that the reputation we once had and enjoyed as the city on the peninsula is no longer the reputation we enjoy. And we are all concerned about that, I know. And probably no one more than you, Steve. Okay, it's not about a lack of commitment or hard work. So for example, when I go to chamber mixers, which I do, I ask business owners, tell me what it's like to do business in our city versus others. And they look at me like, you really want to know, you know? And I'm, you know, unlike Councilmember Burt, who can cite, you know, for years, for decades, I've heard, I'm a newcomer to this work of being involved in the city. And so for me, these are new realizations, aha moments. I've never been a business owner. So I'm hearing it new and fresh. And I see in the eyes, I see in the body language that people are almost sad for us. You know, they know they've got a market that they can tap into elsewhere. They might like to have plunked themselves down here, but they've decided it's too hard to do business here. It's like in high school when you were once the cool kid and now, you know, they've moved on and you're like, wait a minute. And you realize maybe, you know, I'm not wearing the right clothes anymore. So there's an urgency out there that I think we all feel. And we're taking a reputational hit and it's hitting us in the pocketbook as well. I know that staff is working so hard and we got to, you know, council on it and PTC, yet we seem to have a bogged downedness that we haven't figured out. It's like if the city is an interlocking set of gears, there are some really big gears that are gummed up and we don't even quite know what they are. And we're trying to figure out what they are. Maybe we're adding more gears to try to twist things differently. But I think we haven't somehow hit upon, you know, where that sort of core bogged downedness is. I worry that we are giving staff in some ways too much work. Like you're hearing, we need another report, we need another this, we need this and that. And yet, you know, this city never wants to act without knowing precisely why we're acting and what the variables are and what matters. So it feels like we have this bureaucracy, as any city does, trying to address this, that is becoming part of the problem itself. So we've got PTC's ad hoc, which is doing some great work, it looks like, and we have this newish retail committee of the city council. We had a unanimous vote of council 9 months ago to make recommendations on these strategies. The PTC report is not coming back to council until later 2024, so it implies sort of a year beyond council's initial unanimous recommendation. Council will be hearing back from PTC. It's a lot of time. And I know it's a lot of time because there's so many things on our agenda. Nobody's saying anybody's wasting time or not trying to be efficient. We just have too many things going on. So there's such a lag. Questions, sorry. My question is, well, I know it's okay. I'm sorry that I'm extemporizing instead of asking questions. I'm trying to raise a question that I don't know. I certainly don't know the answer to it, but it is about the nature of our own city bureaucracy and the extent to which it is slowing down the process of ultimately getting to these outcomes. So I agree with the concern about permit streamlining and customer experience, and that feels like a perennial conversation. I would love to see a clearer report on, you know, where are we on that? Steve, you implied that other jurisdictions have more budget for economic development. And I want to say, were budget requests made this year? I'm not on the finance committee. I don't know. Were budget requests made and not heeded? Were budget requests not made? There's a question.
You may need to speak to what you commented on earlier. I wouldn't characterize it that way, that other cities have a greater budget for whether it's economic development or support and facilitation of applicants getting through permit processes. So John, or sorry, thinking about John Late. Steve, did you want to clarify on that?
Yeah, so just a little bit of clarity, I think, is that there are different ways to scale a function. There are different things to do. And so I would just say different cities approach it differently. In this particular instance, as Councilmember Burt mentioned and as Ed just alluded to, you know, it is making sure that people can navigate that particular process directly, and you know that could be in development services.
Okay, and so from that context, I would agree that, you know, in my experience alone, I could say that, yes, other cities have placed a higher priority on staffing to facilitate, in particular, commercial applicants getting through the permitting process, really out of a recognition of the jobs that are generated, the sales tax that are generated, and implicitly the self-interest that cities have in supporting that activity. We have not, as an institution, resourced that specific activity. Quite frankly, a majority of our permit applications are residential. And as such, that has been the focus of much of our attention, certainly over the since in recovery from COVID. So resources, I suspect, in that context are an issue, but I wouldn't suggest that that's the primary issue. I do think we're dealing with a really complicated topic that, as was noted earlier, has been built up over decades, both of codes as well as practices. So, you know, I'd say, quite frankly, the challenge for the retail committee is how can you help us accelerate our solutions and for us, for staff, it all stems from the economic strategy that council has adopted. And so if there's a need to revisit what priorities are established there, then that's certainly fair game. But from a staff standpoint, our job is implementation, and we need to have that clarity in order to, as you point out, focus on things you've told us are the most important.
Thank you. My final comment is, my concern is that this report we're being asked to accept, recommend that the city council accept, it feels like a presentation, not a report. To council member Burt's questions, you know, where are the details on the near and medium? And you've pointed out they were presented last month. I think maybe that bundled with this might be more of a report that we could recommend that council accept. This to me is not containing the details that I feel like constitutes a report on progress. So I am concerned about the recommended motion.
Yeah, I think, to be fair, this is really a status report and really Steve's attempt as a one-person shop to pull it together in order to provide information that the retail committee can respond to. And we understand your reaction and at the same time, you know, need to fit it in within the priorities that the organization is working on. Steve?
Right, and I just wanted to call attention to attachment A of the report, which really goes action by action and describes which of those priorities from the unanimously adopted economic development strategy are actively underway throughout the organization. That's really how we were approaching this, is reporting out on the status of the Street Sense report, what's underway, what work is actively taking place in recognition of reporting out on the implementation of that report.
And let me also correct one thing I just said. Was it as a one-person shop, now as a two-person shop with Ruth, who you saw some reference to, is assisting with administrative work, and as such, I think does reflect the ability to get a little more robust in the reporting.
Thank you. Yeah, Ruth is not here. So I just have a few questions here. With the hotels, I know the chamber has members with the hotels, so if we've received a protest letter, right? I mean, an objection letter to joining it. So, and I know you're talking to individual, can they not be part of it? And can the hotel who does not wish to be paying a fee towards it, say, no, I don't want to?
So we're in the start of those discussions with the San Francisco Peninsula to understand what that range of options may be. In recognition of your point about the objection, that's why we're pushing the chamber to include all hoteliers in the conversation as it advances.
Absolutely.
So they're doing their outreach. They're coordinating and communicating with each hotel in town to talk about potential next steps, what that next meeting with the San Francisco Peninsula to discuss options could be. And as that conversation matures and develops, the city will engage as appropriate in terms of what may need to happen from a governmental standpoint.
And then I think it would be also important to discover the sizes of hotels and what, if there's a tiered system in terms of payment and so forth. So that would be another thing that I think that might be valuable to know if there's such a system. So I know that we used to have a lot of large companies that had cafeterias. Is that something that's going to be looked at in order to show that they might have a kitchenette, but then not a cafeteria? I mean, I still remember one of the companies having a jungle on High Street that took over the whole area and had their cafeteria in there that is only for their employees. So I think that might be something that PTC might consider as they're looking through this. Is there another PTC session to review all the work that they had done? And by the way, just for the public to know, if they want to go back to look at the video of what PTC discussed, it was on May 8th of this month.
So the next steps for the PTC report are agendizing it for full council. The thing that PTC is still working on is the ad hoc is putting together a bit of a cover letter to accompany their report to council, distinguishing their perspectives on the Michael Baker report.
And I believe we have it scheduled for the June 18th council meeting. So that does establish some immediate opportunities for next steps and discussion.
June 18th is council meeting?
Yes.
Okay.
And so that's, I just wanted to call attention to Councilmember Lithcott-Haim's point about how long it takes to get back. We are doing what we can to expedite that and get that on the June calendar so we can continue that conversation.
And the guiding principles, are they online on the website for retail?
Yes, so on the City of Palo Alto's business page, which is www.cityofpaloalto.org/business, you'll see my smiling face along with my contact info, which was a recommendation from brokers to make sure people know who the central point of contact for economic development is. And then we also have a page dedicated to our comprehensive economic development strategy. When someone clicks that, they can see both in web form, a breakout of the guiding principles, the actions and recommendations, and also a flip book version of the entire report.
Thank you. So I share a lot of the questions and comments that my colleagues has made, so I'm not going to go into it. I'll save it for comments for later and go to public comments. Mr. Clerk, do we have public comments?
Yes, we do have 2 requests to speak. One moment, please. Our first speaker is Roxy R.
For hitting the nail right on the head. You certainly struck it right perfect. And one thing I learned at business school from a couple of professors, they used to always say, there's 2 types of business people. There's doers and there's talkers. And I think one of our problems is we have too much talking and not enough doers in this town. And that's what it takes, is to get people that can get things done. And a perfect example, I just received this email from Ruth yesterday. Remember, downtown business stakeholders meeting next week. Hello, business partners. We're just 1 week away from our first business stakeholders meeting that will take place on Zoom. That's a mistake right there. Why not have it right here in this room where you can face each other and you can hear other people and you can hear firsthand? It really means something. And that's where I kind of disagree with you, that you can get this done. We could just quit talking about it, but just get it done, set our minds to it. And we can get it done and make these corrections. They're not that big of a deal. It's just getting everyone on the same line. And it comes from the director of planning, Ed, to get Steve on the ball and Ruth on the ball and everyone else on the ball. So there's really a team of 3 or 4 in the planning department that can get this thing going. It's not just Steve. And that's what it takes to get it done. They just have to have the direction and the clarity and their support. You got the support of the city council right here. So that's all it is. I think it's just a priority for you. We want this done and we want it done quickly. We've done enough talking and planning. Let's get it done. We know what needs to be done. And what we find out by listening to people of what needs to be add to the scope. That's all. So anyway, thank you, Pat, for hitting the nail on the head.
Thank you for your comments. Our final speaker is Brad E.
Thank you to the council members and staff. I just want to say, I think it's great. I feel like everyone's heart is in the right place. Like we all want to solve this problem. I always say the first step in solving a problem is recognizing we have a problem. So I think just the fact that we're here today, we're talking about this is a big step. Obviously, I'm a very simple person. I always go to simple solutions. And so I just want to throw out to you guys a simple solution. I think we'll just resolve this all today. Go back to circa 2018, before we made all the changes to the retail preservation ordinance. We had the formula retail. There's a whole slew of things that got passed in 2018 that if we just rolled that back, it would solve a lot of these problems, allowing for the flexibility off the core downtown areas where people could convert from office to retail without having to lose their right to go back to office again if the market changes. So I would really encourage, I think it would save a lot of time, a lot of money. We wouldn't have to do all these studies if we just rolled back a lot of those ordinances that we put into place. I think we could solve that immediately. Things were working then. It was working really well. Regarding the process on permitting, planning, it is a big problem. I think everyone's acknowledged that. I think one of the issues that I don't think people recognize is also we have a lot of like outside plan checking that's going on. And so I don't know if these vendors are getting paid by the comment, but it almost looks like a machine is writing these things. Because you get these comments back and they're just pages and pages. And the ping ponging that goes back and forth between the applicants and these plan checkers, it takes so much time, and to the point that our business, the tenants are calling us up, like pulling their hair out, so frustrated. And then finally we have to say, go talk to this person at the city. But if it wasn't for somebody in our position who knows who that person is, this would have kept on going on for months. And so I don't know if that's a staffing issue or what, but I've seen a lot of pain points in that process as well. I think the concept of an ombudsman, I can't talk, but somebody that can help shepherd an application through the different departments, because my fear is it goes into the system and it's like ping pongs around. And I always encourage applicants to go in person, speak to the planners, sit down with them, stop doing this like email stuff, because days will go by, weeks go by, and everything just gets delayed and everything just gets frustrated until it boils over and people just have had enough. So, and I just want to give it one, we also do a lot of work in Redwood City, just as an example.
Your time is up.
Okay. Well, thank you.
Chair, that concludes public comments for this item.
Thank you, Vince. Is the committee okay to hear the rest of what Brad was going to say about Redwood City?
Yeah, you can ask a question of.
Oh.
Yes.
Okay, so, Brad, could you share with us?
Sorry, I could have just kept going on and on.
No, but I
so
think
many-
we have a process that we want to keep, but since I'm
appreciate
asking you
that.
the question, yeah.
Yeah, so in Redwood City, we had a really challenging listing on kind of in the main core. It was a retail space. And it was of a size that was kind of awkward. It wasn't in a high demand. And the city was really motivated to get it leased, as we are for too. So in the process of listing it, we had the city reach out to us and they asked us, like, what can we do to help? And really, there's only so much the city can really do to help. And it's really just streamline the process when we do have a tenant. It's when we come in, help them get through the process. In this case, we had to convert it from retail to restaurant, which is not an easy endeavor. That is a very expensive endeavor. It usually takes a lot of time. It's a lot that goes into it. But they literally expedited this permit. Within like a couple months, we had a permit ready to go. The tenant was so blown away by the service that he was receiving by the city. He thought that somehow we did something special. And we didn't. We didn't. It was the city that recognized the importance of having that space filled and not having it vacant. I mean, we were at the point that we were thinking maybe we'll just put a wrap on the window to not make it look so bad, but it was really the effort of the city to reach out to try to see what can we do. And they're not going to pay rent. They're not, there's only so much they can do. The only thing to do is streamline that process and make it easier for our tenants. That'll get them open faster, get them hiring faster and operating a lot quicker. And they did just that. And I appreciated that. And again, I think the only thing I could say for Palo Alto is we need to turn into a culture of yes, right? How can we help you get to where you're going to go? Historically, we've been a culture of no, right? And I don't know whether that's because staff's scared of making a mistake, but we really need to give staff the discretion to make some of these decisions to help our tenants, to help applicants get through the process without the fear that they're going to lose their job or whatever it may be. But culture of yes is really what I really emphasize here. But I really appreciate all your guys' comments. Pat, thank you. I think you were dead on. Circa 2018, roll back. That's my main comment. Thank you.
Thank you for clarifying, Brad, and
Chair
sharing
Ku?
the. Yes.
We have two more requests to speak that just came in recently. Would you like to reopen public comment?
Sure. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Michael C.
Good morning, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we can.
Oh, yeah, just making sure. Well, everything was said. I'm Michael Campilongo, one of the owners of California Avenue, two restaurants, Teruna and Italico. I just want to repeat again, what is important is to speed up, to beautify the street, making those streets more attractive, because I think one of the problems of the vacancy is that people are not willing to rent a place where there's the unknown. We know this clearly. But I want to give you a number to make an example. As everybody knows, probably on this committee, with my partners, I'm about to open a restaurant in San Carlos. It's not on a prime location, I know. It will be on El Camino Real train station, but still a very good location. And we're going to pay about $3 per square feet. The piazza, the place looks very good, it's very elegant. And on the same time, just wondering with my brother, brainstorming, said, how cool will be to open a small place, like a small Terun or something on University Avenue or Ramona downtown, my lovely Palo Alto downtown. So remember, $3 per square foot, San Carlos. And we've been asked for about $10 or more per square foot on University Avenue. That's difficult for us. I mean, if you think about at the end of the year, 12 months, we're talking about $250,000 probably. The problem is still the same. Palo Alto is a beautiful, attractive town, but the offices are closed. We don't have the same people coming from Stanford anymore. I'm brainstorming now what I saw those days. I've been to San Luis Obispo, where my wife used to be a student, and I checked about the price of a retail and a restaurant. We're talking about $3-4 per square foot. And San Luis Obispo has exactly the same characteristic of Palo Alto, I think, a university like Stanford and a beautiful downtown. But we need to make this downtown attractive to charge $10 per square foot. That's the only way. That's it. Thank you so much for your time. I'm very happy we're talking about this. There's a big change coming in our society, and we need to embrace that because we don't Palo Alto has to be on the same speed of other town. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your comments. Our next speaker is Nancy C.
Hi, good morning, everybody. I'm just so pleased that Julie and Pat said what they said today. You guys are right on as a business owner. It couldn't be more clear that we need to get more efficient, speed things up. We need your leadership. We need help in the planning department. And just as a comment, when I opened Coupa Cafe at Stanford Research Park, it took 9 months after we were open to get the permit to serve beer and wine. I mean, it seems mind-blowing. The ABC had our license sitting on a desk, but we couldn't receive it until the city of Palo Alto signed off. This type of thing shouldn't happen. It's a simple procedure if somebody just pays attention to it. So I think it's a lot about efficiency and prioritizing, help people get going. And besides that, I really want you to focus on the fact that 20 years ago, when I opened on Ramona Street, Palo Alto was the hippest place and the most amazing town I had ever seen. And we've lost this. In Spanish, you say mística. We've lost this feeling of like we're the hip place where people want to go. We're losing it to our neighboring cities. We need to do something fast. We have no time to waste, but you got to give people a reason to come to us. And it can't just be isolated businesses. It needs to be a whole feeling of our community. And I just want to thank the council for doing what they can, but we need to like start demanding faster timelines. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Our final speaker is Michael.
Good morning. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak. I'm Michael Ekwall, owner of La Bodeguita over on California Avenue. And I appreciate all of the comments of the previous speakers. I think that one of the biggest concerns for us as a business is the lack of any defined urgency on behalf of the city. So we saw that in November, and obviously you probably know our history is that we were opposed to the permanent closure. We're accepting that that's a reality. But since November, nothing has happened on California Avenue. And as Maiko said, the street, I don't think he said this, but the street looks awful. There's no consistency. There's no aesthetic. There's no enforcement. There's no leadership from the city on any of these issues. So I actually took the time to meet with the original ad hoc committee that, was kind of, put into place at the beginning of the year. And, just gave some really simple recommendations on things that could be expedited and probably done within the course of just a couple of days to actually make California Avenue look open, to make it look attractive. And nothing has happened. Not one of those recommendations has been implemented. And there are 2 new signs for some very basic wayfinding on El Camino. But for people that don't know California Avenue or just driving by, it really is an embarrassment. And, I think that in a way, and I don't mean to offend anyone because I know that we have some new members here, is that the city should be ashamed at the way that California Avenue looks. And really, we were a thriving community prior to COVID. And I understand that the business climate has changed. As Micah pointed out, the occupancy has changed. We've lost a lot of businesses in the research park, in the business district. Businesses have departed, but that doesn't mean that the street needs to look awful. And I really would like to see, we personally hired a graphic designer to make banners to put over the bollards because, again, they look terrible. they were something that could have been produced in the course of 2 days and installed. That was back in December, and nothing has happened. I think there was an agreement that they looked attractive, and even if it was temporary, they would have added to the luster of the street. And even though the street is closed, it doesn't need to look as though we're out of business. And that's how it looks. And I think Mr. Rapp said this a while back, is that people driving past California Avenue look at it and just drive right by. And they think California Avenue is out of sight and it's out of mind. We really need some urgency, some things to happen.
Your time is up.
Thank you very much. But we need things to happen sooner than later. Thank you.
Chair, that concludes public comments for this item.
Thank you, Vin. Let's bring it back to the committee for comments. And if there is a change on the recommendation, also let me know about that. But let's bring it back for comments. Council, Julie, you want to go first?
I think I've already made all mine.
Okay.
Because I made comments when I should have been asking questions.
Thank you, Julie. Pat?
Well, thanks. And I somewhat did the same, but I think I want to try to translate the comments into perspective directions by the committee. So we have in the staff report the whole attachment A, which gives an extensive list of actions. The bulk of those appear to be more medium term than near term. And these are really good and important things that we're going to want to do. But as we've heard from a number of the speakers, and I'll say from the standpoint of the community support for what we're doing, as long as they see places like Cal Ave in kind of a poor aesthetic condition, the support for going forward is lower. We've got to do, for the last 4 years, we've needed to do near-term actions that make it more attractive, and then we build off of that for the long term. And so the last retail committee meeting had a number of several of the actions, but a limited number. But there's one timeline that reflects sign fabrication and materials improvements, and basically taking us out into the fall for this from November, when the council gave real clear direction on wanting short-term measures to happen as quickly as possible. That ends up being basically better almost all of a year to do things like replacing the covers on the bollards and getting planters and things that I have seen other cities do much more quickly, and with fairly attractive outcomes. And I just I guess I want to ask, if we said we want some of these things done more quickly, what would it take?
Yeah, let me ask Bruce Fukuji, who's been leading our effort on Cal Ave, to comment on where things are and perhaps answer that question directly as asked.
Hi, good morning, Bruce Fukuji. So in our meeting that we had in April, we went through and outlined a timeline for implementation of these things. And I think that in looking at how to expedite doing that, the decision was to do a very limited procurement process that's very focused and not go through the typical sort of bidding process that the city normally contracts to do. And I think that's the most efficient way to actually do this. So and working with Public Works, we put together a bid document which outlines all of the different elements that we're looking at procuring, and then have a single contractor to do that. And then by doing that, that would actually expedite the process for being able to deliver these things. Some of the things the city can't do, they could do it through purchasing. But what we're trying to do is actually have this, the dollar amount on some of it's kind of greater than what can be done directly through purchasing. And so what we've been doing is, been working with Peter Jensen in Public Works to put that together. It's complete. We want to review that with Ed. We're doing that this Friday. And then after doing that, then it's going to go through a bidding process. We have 3 different contractors who are going to bid on that. And then once that's complete, then we can do the contracting process for that. And that will enable all this stuff to be able to be implemented.
Let me ask for clarification here. Part of the public testimony was on the design itself and the aesthetics basically of what would be put in to replace. Could you describe where we are there?
Yeah, I mean, what we, in the meeting we had in April, well, actually going back to the meeting we had in February, we started with meeting with the Cal merchants. We went through a prioritization list of what their issues and concerns were. We identified what the top things were, looking at barrier replacement strategies for being able to do that. And then we met with them and talked with them and presented some concepts about what to do. They were basically accepted in terms of an approach for how to doing that. We repackaged that up. We presented actual specific design concepts in the April meeting as to what to do both at El Camino, Birch, and Ash Streets. And those comprised of looking at pavement coloring, planters, bollards, bike striping, signage, traffic signage, and new commercial signage to be able to do entry identity for the district. We've gone through a process of having that kind of reviewed both with the merchants and presented here in this meeting last month. So now we're going through actually the procurement process to get that started. So that's the status of that moving forward.
Yeah, and if I could kind of complement that with to your point, Councilmember, on the question of what can we do to move faster? Well, let me start by explaining what has taken as long as it has, which is effectively the buy-in, the development and the stakeholder engagement in order to get us to a place that we're confident going forward. Fastest thing in the world would be if you empowered me to just run with it. To the point that was made, we have procurement limitations on what we can sole source versus what we need to bid, what needs to go to council. And at the same time, I'm not asking for that authority because quite frankly, the buy-in and including the council approval is part of the system that we operate within. And we have been proceeding on that basis. And as Bruce just described it, I think we're pretty close. Again, not as fast as I would like, clearly not as fast as the businesses would like, but part of the obligation we have is to gain that buy-in that will allow us to ensure that both the elements that we're working on as well as the ultimate execution reflects the values and the expectations that we have, both of the council and community stakeholders that have been involved and that will be critical of it once we put them up. Guarantee it, not everybody will be happy, but that's again mitigated to the extent that we can with the ways that we've approached this.
Well, let's, I hear that at kind of a summary level. And some of this is our procurement practices, which kind of the corollary to our own bureaucracies, some of them inherent to any local government and some may be compounded in Palo Alto. So to get covers on bollards, take just one example. Isn't that something, if that's a discrete action for the dollar amount associated with that, what's the most streamlined way that we could do that versus the way that we are?
So I'm happy to talk about this. It came up last month at Retail Committee. I was asked the question, when will the barrier covers be replaced? I then gave the answer of a month, trying to line it up with Third Thursday. And in the interest of accountability and transparency, we'll just disclose, as is obvious to Michael Eckwall and anyone else along Cal Ave, that those have not yet been replaced. There was some work with the fabricator of the signs to try and get a better fit on those so that.
I like the way they fit. They were droopy. And so I want to make sure that it would meet my expectations.
And so in working with the partner, we got a design that we think will get that more tailored fit, that will look better, and recognizing that these are not a forever cover, but we trying to strike the balance between something that looks better, more inviting and more welcoming now to stand until the planters and other measures are installed. So we got the template design, which we needed so we could port the art over to that. We now have the art in hand, so it'll be a quick conversation between me and Bruce the moment we get out of here about that art, and then shipping that over to the vendor. I need to work with the vendor on timeline for actual production and install, but my hope is we can get that done very quickly.
And the art was agreed upon when?
So the art, there's some that Michael Eckwall produced that I walked around Cal Ave and, kind of shopped around, made sure there was buy-in on the last, again, just from the point of stakeholder engagement and buy-in. We didn't want to install something that everybody thought was ugly, hideous, horrendous. So we got that. And so that was
That's the art that we're using.
So we're gonna do.
But let me just say, as we heard from Michael, that art was there at the first of the year.
And
so now.
Just one point of clarification. I received that art, I believe it was back in March was when it kind of landed to me. So I just noting that, that's what really got this process kind of rolling.
So I don't know what happened between when he produced it and I think I don't know who in the city they forwarded it to, but.
And it may have been shared and just, where it would all that. Regardless.
Quite frankly, I'm going to express some frustration here. We're moving on it, and unless you want to start an investigation over who it was delivered to, I'd suggest.
No, I want to understand. Really, using this as an example of why it takes from the council direction in November, and new art for the bollards was something that was considered low-hanging fruit and not a big complicated task. And that it will be maybe 7 months to get that through, even though we were provided with art at the first of the year that is the art that apparently we are using. And yes, as a member of the council and the committee, it's not an investigation. I want to understand that process, and I want us to reflect objectively on that. We hear our own perspective from within staff, and there's a disconnect between how quickly things are happening and how it compares to how quickly other cities make comparable things happen.
I think, Bruce, you wanted to add?
No, I think it's a great opportunity to really look at that process and sort out what can be done to streamline it. We received the artwork from Michael. We decided that we should present it here in the retail committee. We presented it here. We got feedback here, which was different than what was proposed. We took that feedback to say, okay, that's probably a better idea actually about what to do for how to do the signage, to think about it along an entire street frontage. So we took that, and that information then was used to help communicate to the vendor around what to do. So I think by having a vendor involved in the design process, that adds time to it. So, there could have been a decision just to execute what was given, and that would be fine. But there was some reflection given to how to do that might be more effective in terms of when it's done. So that feedback was introduced into that. So those are two things that came into the process that added more time. So, if we want to have a more streamlined process, there could be, you could just go ahead and say, okay, go talk directly with the vendor and just immediately do it, or have staff design it. Or go back to the Eckwalls and say, hey, look, we need to meet with your designer and talk with them about things that need to change. There's a lot of different ways you could do it.
And if I could add to supplement that staff response to your question, I would actually look at this example as a success. It's not there yet, so I wouldn't completely call it a success, but from the perspective of a successful partnership between a single stakeholder on the street that took the initiative to develop the graphics that we are running with, and that has involved call it the iteration that has been necessary to reflect both the buy-in as well as the implementation steps that would be required. We actually did something very similar in Midtown with banners that are now on Middlefield Road with Taste Buds Kitchen coming forward and doing the same. So I think it really reflects a positive outcome. And again, really wish we could go faster, and so not making apologies for it. I'm concurring in the frustration. But in the span of between January and here we are in May, that relatively speaking, I really would like to see this done, and that we would celebrate it as an example of a positive partnership between business, individual businesses, the city, our ability to ensure that others have the ability to weigh in on what's being proposed, and then running with it in a way that once the product's up, we can look to as a positive example of how the city and businesses can partner on the street.
I think you're right that the collaboration from that standpoint is a very positive one. The amount of time things take is not, and that's what I'm trying to focus on. So we have, for example, I don't think I've seen the replacement of the sign on Oregon Page Mill that goes the off-street sign on the turnoff on Birch, which was a sign that years ago was recognized needed replacement. It's something that we have some really capable people in public works on. I had not realized until Brad explained to me on the whimsical signs that we have at the Children's Library, the Children's Museum and Zoo, and the Arts Center are just fantastic in most people's minds. And I had asked 2 years ago of Brad, wow, is that artist, who'd we contract with? And he goes, no, that's a staff member. And I'm going, holy smokes, we have really capable, creative people on staff that were able to do those things. And I'm not thinking that sign on Page Mill is I'm assuming a more standard sign, but maybe a gateway sign that would be whimsical. But why haven't we been able to replace the sign on Page Mill to Birch for all these years when it was actually overdue? Is my understanding several years ago.
I can answer that. I was a liaison to the California Avenue Business District Group and CABA, and they were actually talking about that sign. They were making a choice of the sign, and they were still going through the discussions of what they would like to see the sign made out of, and they were actually going to go with a metal type. But then COVID hit and the meeting stopped. So the outreach was going on through staff through that CABA meeting, but because of COVID, then it stopped there.
Yeah, but okay, so this is 2024. It just seems like that's a pretty straightforward action, and I just can't understand why it's stalled or why it hasn't happened yet.
Well, I'll share my experience with that. I believe, and I did see a mock-up that was done. Ultimately, I think it was put into the package of what is the overall wayfinding signage package anticipated for Cal Ave. And so that's the ongoing effort. Part of the issue over the course of time has been called the absence of a partner in terms of an organization involved. As CABA stopped meeting, and in large measure, Steve has been trying to rally a group to be across the table with the city in order to lend voice in a broader perspective than individual businesses, which had been the challenge. So that's, I think, now back up at least in some form, perhaps not as a formal organization, but now with regular meetings that have been scheduled that will provide the forum and venue for addressing that among other issues. The same effort has now been launched downtown. And while I understand Mr. Rapp not happy that it's being organized virtually as opposed to in person, I think that was intended to enable more stakeholders to participate than we had expected would be available in an in-person venue. So again, just an example of, once again, I would point to the progress while recognizing that it hasn't moved as quickly as we would like.
Yeah, I would just return to, look, it's a dilapidated entrance sign. I think we're overcomplicating it. And that I think that the merchants that are there, if we presented them with one or two alternatives, we could get to an agreement 2 years ago, 3 years ago, whatever, or in a very short order. And I think we just need to reflect that despite what we're saying, it takes us, from what Lydia was talking about was, 5+ years ago that we were on the cusp of this, understanding we had a disruption during the peak of COVID, but we've been really beyond that for a couple of years. And it's just not rocket science to have a new sign there.
Councilmember, with all due respect, again, the aesthetics of, just again, let's use this example. The aesthetics of whatever is to be put in place, we want, and I'm sure the council would want, to reflect the aesthetic that is ultimately adopted for CalAV as an identity. And so that's the process that Bruce has been working through. And again, I share the frustration, absolutely. And in fact, it's just my decades of experience in doing this work that has caused me to be what the Long Beach mayor said, Ed, you're so monotone. I said, I have built this up as a skill because I have to. That's part of the job. So, at the same time, I absolutely reflect the frustration. At the same time, we are moving, and I want to ensure that our staff are motivated and feel positive that the work that they are doing is appreciated and we have momentum to go. And quite frankly, if what we're going to encounter at every retail meeting is a deconstruction on the steps we've been at, that's going to be increasingly challenging for me to push the organization forward. And my apologies for playing this out publicly, but quite frankly, I think it's necessary given the conversation we've been having this morning.
Well, as a policymaker, I think I'm reflecting a broad concern in the community and by the businesses and the property owners that many things that have been hoped for and anticipated for several years as near-term measures are still not there. And they're not really happening in the near term. They're happening in the medium term. And I think it's a problem. And unless we recognize it, we're not going to really change things. And I think there's a broad willingness to maybe not go through as extensive a processes as otherwise might be desired, because there's a greater sense of urgency, and that we aren't really recognizing that there is that willingness by the council, by the property and business owners, and even by the community to get some near things done sooner. Now, secondly, on this list that we do have, which is a great list, what we don't have is any kind of dates associated with this, nor who's the kind of the lead on it or the department that is leading it, because some things may be economic development, some things may be public works or whatever. And so that's one thing I would like to see as it goes to the council, is something that's more concrete so that it's not open-ended on the timing on all these things. Now, with an understanding that dates are target dates. Those are not dates certain, but but they still provide a valuable function for everybody to understand. Here's what we're intending to do when. And then this is the department that's the lead on X or Y.
Well, council member, to that point, I would suggest that the accountability is mine. I would not want to itemize departmental responsibilities, because part of the challenge we have is that this really is an interdepartmental effort. And I want to ensure that I can keep staff focused on the work rather than suggesting that by itemizing responsibilities that stakeholders should be contacting those individual departments.
So I do appreciate it's interdepartmental. It's just it's a question of for folks on the outside, whether it's the council or the businesses, they don't know where to turn on a lot of these things because it's nebulous in that regard. So if they have a question on a given issue or want to have input, I'm not sure, and maybe that's less necessary than having target dates on these, but I worry about things kind of being to everybody outside lost in the ether.
And to that point, I do want to ensure that our one-stop point of contact is Mr. Guagliardo.
Okay. And then I did want to touch on the Visitors Bureau. And I don't know really about all of the discussions, but the issue of whether this would be spurred and happen quicker if at the outset it was conveyed that the city would be willing to be a financial contributor to this. When we left off, the hotels had said, no, we'll take it over. It's working so well, we'll take it over. And then X number of years later, we really had one hotel owner who insisted they could do better and it should be returned to the chamber. And I was really sad to see that happen. But I don't know whether the hotels are in part held up by the question of, well, are they willing to chip in? Because the concept initially was, we just increased the TOT. Let's take, I forget, a small percentage of the new dollars that came to the city and reinvest them in the hotels, which will drive occupancy and rates, and we'll get a return on that investment, in addition to the fact that we owe it to them. So that's a concept that it's not in our budget, I realized, but I don't know what discussions have happened and whether that would help move that ball forward more quickly.
I think the conversation's not just right for that. I think they're still working through understanding what the offering from the San Francisco Peninsula would be. And then as they get to the point and they really start looking at that return on investment, I think that's the appropriate point to engage and mention their investment might be lesser. And so their return on investment could conceivably be greater if the city was contributing to that.
Well, my sense is, and I haven't had the discussion with them, but I think it would be useful first for us to ask, would it be facilitated if there was a commitment by the council to have providing some financial, not the full, but some financial support toward that? And would that help facilitate that process? Because I'm guessing that it's going through their minds, well, what's it going to cost me and what am I really going to get in return as a hotel? And if they've got the partner and financially with the city, then that becomes an easier decision.
Pat, I just want to do a time check.
Yeah.
There's a number of us that are going to a memorial in Santa Clara.
Okay.
So if you can finish, then we'll be.
Okay,
able to-
thanks.
On that point, I think we can take that as a resource for the conversations with the hoteliers and with this chamber and others.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, thank you. Just very quickly, when you bring the report to City Council, perhaps we can also include some information about what Redwood City does in terms of their advertising, marketing, and attracting businesses. And also, I receive a lot of really informative emails of events from Napa also. And so, it's something to explore and to look at and bring that to council as well. And I think, Pat has touched on it. Of course, there's an urgency. I'm still a little bit concerned about our immediate targets. So when we say immediate, what I'm thinking is like not tomorrow, but within a week or two, right? So and the discussion on the California Avenue bollard wrap, I think we had determined a sign with words on it that would make people know that that is a closed street and they can come and play whatever I said, eat and shop, right, shop. And lastly, I was kind of wondering on California Avenue, the teeth golfing thing, it's right there in the front. And I wonder, does it block the visual of California Avenue itself? So when you're back out there, perhaps you can take another look and see if any of the other shops are okay with it being somewhere else. I know that's a spot that, nobody's going to complain about, but it also blocks that road. Yeah. So I don't know if, do we want to accept and accept this report with all the other recommendations that we provided?
Yeah, I'm not sure we need you to accept the report. I think the feedback is extremely valuable and the discussion probably more so than any write-up that would be going to the full council. So perhaps we can just leave it at that.
Is the committee good with this?
Yeah.
All right. All right, so with that, we can conclude item number 1, our only item, and thank you for a report out. And anything on future meetings, Steve?
We had previously discussed not meeting in June, given that the date takes place after the last council meeting. If the committee so chooses to continue with that, our next meeting would convene in August after the council recess. We'll be working to agendize this report with the feedback we heard today to council, and we'll also be discussing the PTC item on June 18th at council.
And before we end, I just want to make sure that sign for California Avenue bollards. So what is the ETA?
So I have art in hand now. I'll be working with the vendor. The moment I can get an update, we'll provide an update in probably the city manager's briefing about what that date is. My hope would be it's in the next 10 days or so. So that's just past the range of immediate in the next week or so. But I'm really doing what I can to make sure that we hit as soon as we can, recognizing the delays we faced thus
Does
far.
that include installation?
Yes, that's my hope.
And you're saying bollard, do you mean barriers?
Yes, thank you for the clarification, Julie. So we're not doing bollards just yet. We're talking about those orange water barriers that are out there. Those are what are going to be up for the next few months as Bruce continues to work on planters and other medium term solutions.
Our planters are being viewed as medium term?
So the thought that Bruce is working on with that bid document he was mentioning and all those things, planters are included in that.
Planters, is it replacing the
And-
the barriers?
Yeah, not to re-engage in this
Yeah.
full topic, but yes, the planters would be replacing the barrier covers as we continue to explore the longer term visioning for Cal Ave and what we want to do long term there.
And kind of the urgency on both signage on Page Mill and El Camino. What's the timeline on that?
Yeah, hi. Once the contractor's selected, we've already identified the vendor who would actually produce the sign. So we're actually wanting them to subcontract with them. So we're doing another step to eliminate another obstacle on the timing. So we've been meeting directly with the sign fabricators to actually look at the design for what that can be. And so we're in process on that.
And is that capability outside of our public works sign group?
I think so, yeah. I mean, they could, there's the design and then there's the fabrication. And, we can certainly talk with staff about design capacity. Part of what we're doing, because we're looking at district identity on Cal Avenue as to what that sign would be, and then looking at what to do over on Oregon Expressway. is that we just, our urban field studio, part of their work is in two phases. The first phase was sort of these sort of near-term things, and they're looking at signage and branding. And we just have gone through an exercise where they've now produced 3 different design concepts for what to do for the identity that would be on that area. But we have not had a chance to share that with staff yet, or, because I just saw it Monday, and then share that at our next staff meeting with our merchants.
I just want to say, given what you've described as kind of our problems when we go out to bid
Yeah.
and all of that, and then contrasting it with, and I don't know really our public works sign group capability, but when I found out that some of the best signs in the city were done, designed, created, produced and installed by our public works staff, I went, wow, that capability far exceeds what I envision, and I'm very impressed. And I just want to make sure that we're not adding to the timeline and the complexity when we have some great capabilities with in-house staff.
Okay, great. Yeah, we'll look into that.
Okay, thank you, and we're adjourned. I'm sorry. Yes, Tim?